Digging deep one night, getting lost in ancient warfare and weaponry, I came across something that really caught my eye. At first, it seemed plague inspired or even nightmare inducing. What I found about it was even more interesting, though. Let me know what you guys think. When we think of medieval warfare, our minds often drift to knights in shining armor, stoic swords, and colossal siege engines. Yet, hidden among these iconic images is a lesser known but deadly polearm, the Bec de Corbin. Translating roughly to raven's beak, or crow's beak in French, the Bec de Corbin found its niche in an age when plate armor was on the rise and knights were turning into walking fortresses. Originating and evolving in the 14th and 15th centuries, this hammer-like polearm combines striking power with a cunning ability to puncture armor. Though overshadowed by more glamorous weapons, the Bec de Corbin's brutal efficiency earned it a place in the grim reality of medieval battlefields across Europe. I want to talk about its design, origin, and deadly function. By the late 14th century, European warfare was transforming. Plate armor grew ever more advanced, from simpler coats of plates to the fully articulated suits that would dominate the 15th century. A knight encased in steel was a fearsome sight, capable of shrugging off many traditional slashes from swords or axes. Meanwhile, infantry tactics evolved, with more focus on disciplined ranks of foot soldiers, some armed with halberds or pikes, others with specialized polearms designed to counter heavy armor. Among these specialized polearms were hammers and picks on long shafts, generically labeled poleaxes in English or martel de fer in French. The Bec de Corbin stood out in this family for its distinctive pick-like spike. As knights took the battlefield in shining harness, the Bec de Corbin answered with a precisely shaped metal beak and hammerhead that could break or puncture even robust steel plating. This clash between unstoppable armor and unstoppable armor-piercing tool set the stage for the weapon's grim reputation. The Bec de Corbin typically measured 5 to 6 feet, 1.5 to 1.8 meters in overall length, though variants could be shorter or taller. It consisted of a wooden shaft, often made of hardwood like ash or oak, chosen for its durability and springiness. A metal head. This head featured 3 main components: the beak, the crow's beak, a hardened steel spike that curved downward or outward, resembling a raven's hooked bill. This spike was designed to punch through or wedge into armor. The hammer face. Opposite the beak was a hammer-like surface, usually rectangular or slightly convex, used for crushing blows against plate or for knocking an armored foe off balance. An optional top spike. Many Bec de Corbin came with a long spike protruding from the top, ideal for thrusting. This spike's length varied from just a few inches to over a foot, making the weapon multifunctional, hooking, hammering, or spearing. All these features combined gave the wielder multiple attack angles. The beak could crack plate, the hammer could deliver concussive force, and the top spike could stab into gaps or lighter armor. The weapon's weight distribution was typically head-heavy, aiding in delivering punishing strikes, but demanding strength and skill to maneuver effectively. As armorers refined tempered steel breastplates, blacksmiths turned to polearms with pointed steel picks. The arms race forced both sides, knights and foot soldiers, to innovate. Armor. Thicker steel in vital areas, reinforcing shoulders, elbows, knees, and chest. Weapons. Concentrated, pointed force, capable of transferring energy through steel plating. Then the Bec de Corbin's beak. By focusing the strike on a tiny surface area, it could produce extreme pressure at impact. Even if it didn't penetrate fully, it could dent plate armor enough to cause blunt trauma or hamper the knight's movement. If the beak found a seam, like under an armpit or visor hinge, the results could be lethal. The hammer face, meanwhile, excelled at landing percussive blows that rattled foes within their metal shells. Once a knight was stunned or knocked prone, finishing them off became far easier. On foot, a soldier armed with a Bec de Corbin, or similar polehammer, could stand in formation or fight in small groups, using reach to keep heavily armored cavalry at bay. Skilled users combined the hooking motion of the beak with a pulling action to unhorse or destabilize opponents. In short, it transformed the battlefield dynamic by making armor less invincible. While the Bec de Corbin was not as widespread as simpler polearms like spears or halberds, it found a niche among men-at-arms or specialized infantry. They might stand in front ranks, prepared to meet a cavalry charge, or form part of polearm contingents used to break up enemy lines. We see glimpses of such weapons in Hundred Years' War battles, 1337 to 1453, and later Burgundian conflicts, though references are often lumped in with pollexes or warhammers. The user might adopt a stance akin to a quarterstaff fighter, controlling distance with a long shaft, launching quick jabs with the top spike, then switching grip to deliver overhead hammer blows or hooking strikes with the beak. In close quarters, hooking an opponent's shield or limb could open them up for a lethal thrust. Sometimes, foot soldiers used the top spike as a short spear, particularly if they lost formation or needed to fight in a swirling melee. On the defensive, the Bec de Corbin could check a charging knight. One well-timed strike to the horse's armor, or the rider's stirrups could topple them. Meanwhile, the hammer side could devastate lightly armored infantry or crack open wooden shields. The sheer versatility allowed smaller groups to hold their ground against knights who had once dominated the battlefield with minimal resistance. The Bec de Corbin was part of a broader family of polehammer or poleaxe weapons. In Germany, one might see the Lucerne hammer, which had a more pronounced spiked hammer and a pronged beak. In Italy or Switzerland, warhammers and halberds sometimes blended beaks with axe blades. These designs all aim to solve the same challenge: how to cripple or kill an armored foe quickly. Though design details shifted by region, the Swiss often favored halberds for massed infantry formations. The principle remained: a dedicated hammer or pick on a staff overcame the protective advantage of plate. The Bec de Corbin's hallmark was often the elegantly curved crow's beak spike, while other pollexes might have simpler or multi-pronged heads. This synergy of shape and function gave each region's version a distinct flair, but united them in lethal efficiency against knights clad in steel. Unlike the longsword or knightly lance, the Bec de Corbin was not typically a symbol of chivalry or high status. It was more a practical tool in the arsenal of men-at-arms, mercenaries, and sometimes lesser knights seeking an edge. However, over time, certain poleaxes, including the Bec de Corbin, gained a measure of prestige, especially among knights who trained in poleaxe combat for judicial duels or foot tournaments. Manuscripts from the 15th century depict knights in half armor practicing poleaxe fighting, with the beak, hammer, and spike carefully illustrated. This suggests that while the Bec de Corbin might have begun as a tool for infantry to counter knights, it evolved into an accepted part of knightly martial arts. Even so, it never fully displaced the sword as a status symbol. Instead, it represented a professional soldier's or knight's dedication to practicality. If you couldn't rely solely on your sword to pierce armor, you'd keep a reliable crow's beak at hand. By the 16th century, firearms and improvements in ranged weaponry began to dominate the battlefield, gradually reducing the prevalence of heavy plate armor. Muskets and artillery could render even the thickest armor obsolete, and cavalry roles shifted accordingly. Polearms that had specialized in busting armor, like the Bec de Corbin, saw less demand as full plate gave way to lighter armor that balanced mobility with ballistic protection. Yet, the legacy endured. In martial arts treatises from the late medieval and Renaissance periods, we find sections devoted to poleaxe or hammer-based combat. These texts detail footwork, grips, hooking techniques, and lethal finishing moves, evidence that the weapon had a recognized place in the martial culture of the day. Some city guards or ceremonial units continued to carry decorative poleaxes or halberds for formalities, preserving a hint of the Bec de Corbin's savage past. Today, museums and private collections display examples of these polehammers, often noting their sophisticated forging and the specialized blacksmithing required to produce the reinforced beak and hammerhead. Reenactors and historical combat enthusiasts occasionally revive the weapon in demonstrations, showcasing how a well-placed peck from the crow's beak can turn steel plate into a liability. The Bec de Corbin remains a stark reminder of medieval warfare's brutal practicality. Born out of necessity to counter plate armor, it exemplifies the interplay between offensive and defensive innovations. Its crow's beak spike, hammer face, and optional top spear offered an array of destructive possibilities, from denting a knight's visor to hooking his leg mid-lunge. This adaptability allowed foot soldiers and knights alike to hold their own against the mightiest opponents. Although overshadowed by more romanticized arms like the longsword or lance, the Bec de Corbin quietly shaped the battlefield. It helped democratize the fight against heavily armored cavalry, giving infantry a tool to challenge once untouchable knights. Over time, it even found its way into the training halls of nobility, proving that function sometimes outshines form when survival is on the line. In a world where a single blow could determine life or death, the Bec de Corbin's menacing design spoke louder than any heraldic crest. Today, as we sift through museum relics or study fighting manuals, we uncover this crow's beak hammer anew, a testament to the lethal ingenuity medieval warriors harnessed to transform a simple shaft and steelhead into a nightmare for the armor-clad. Thus, the deadly Bec de Corbin stands vindicated as one of medieval Europe's most potent responses to the age of steelplate,